There we go. So got the recording going now.
Okay.
So this recording is going to be for whoever the viewers might be, our Cosmos Cafe crew and the lurkers. Get a better picture of exactly how this topic came about, where maybe we would like to go with it. We don't necessarily have to introduce the topic when the conversation's going. So this is kind of an introduction outside of the cafe.
A taste for people if they want to get on the cafe.
Right. And also that'll leave more space for the actual discussion.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
We can let that go however it wants to. There's seed questions posted on the page, of course.
Okay.
So here I'll give a brief intro to John Durham Peters, who we didn't really want to focus on him. We want to focus on his writing, but he teaches and writes on media history and philosophy now at Yale. I guess before that he was at University of Iowa for about 30 years. And he's written 3 books. We're focusing on his first book, which is called Speaking into the Air, A History of the Idea of Communication. He's also written Courting the Abyss, Free Speech, Liberal Tradition. And his latest one was The Marvelous Clouds, which we noted before that we took a liking to, and we discussed before in one of the alternate reality discussions. That's towards a philosophy of elemental media, like clouds,
yes.
Sky, sea,
yes.
fire, the body. So maybe you can kind of throw out how you came about his books, if you'd like.
Okay.
What appeals to you?
Okay. Well, I ran across the book roughly about why I was coming on to Infinite Conversation, being a lurker and listening to different conversations like transforming language, transparent language, and different things. And I ran across the book and Speaking in the Air, and it just spoke to me because it gave a history of the very notion of communication based on all the way back to the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, when telegraph, radio, a lot of the early media was coming online, and how that media has come to affect the way we do business of communicating. And in that book, he goes in depth of the history of even before that time, of how just talking to each other way back to the Greeks and other sources, how we came as human beings to conceptualize what communication was. When telegraph and radio and phone and TV came online, I believe what appealed to me about that book is he was making a clear case of how much we have become disembodied from our own sense of what it is to communicate, which is not, to me, to say that we're just material objects and bodies, but that we've kind of ungrounded ourselves. We've overextended, and we've lost sight of the ancient way of understanding that good communication acknowledges there is difference. We're always going to be working with difference. There is no idealized mind meld of communication. There's always going to be a little bit of difference, no matter how close we get to each other. So that's one way I came to the book. The Marvelous Clouds I read second, and that appealed to me because it's basically supporting my position that we neglect that the very body, our body, is a media, an organic media technology. That
right.
all the other technology that we're doing are actually extensions of our own body, and we've kind of become over romanticized with how far we've extended out working with we've been over romanticized of extending that technology out so far that I think we're tripping over ourselves.
Right. And yeah, you mentioned before, you quoted him in one of the past conversations that the body is the most basic of all media. And what are we doing here where we have a couple heads talking? We can see our movements and things like that, but there's not that full connection. We've talked about that multiple times. And what I like about Speaking into the Air is how he kind of stops short at the 1950s and on, which we do have an overload of people talking about this and that, and kind of pinpointing how the communication breakdown needs to be solved or fixed, and through more technology or something like that. But he, in the Speaking into the Air, which I haven't read too much, I've read the introduction, and we posted that maybe only read the first 5 pages of this to get a glimpse into what the book's about. But he goes back into time, like you're saying, and really gets at the core of what communication means. He goes into the definition, the roots, the Latin roots of communication. He goes into, I like the William James quote that he has in there, how around his time there was the solipsism, the how we are all individuals unable to communicate with each other, and telepathy, which is the more utopian side of communication, that what our goal is to reach that point. Well, we know exactly what we're talking about, but he's saying in the book that we're never going to reach that point, but it's also not this individual island. There's some sort of bridging going on.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things he said is that acknowledging the difference does not stop the yearning to communicate. The difference makes more things possible.
Right.
And that duality that you laid out, dichotomy of telepathy and I can't pronounce the word, but it's basically we're islands unto our own private experience. I see that as trying to acknowledge that is a basic difference, but we do not have to be necessarily stuck in that polarity. That this medium here, like you said, we're talking heads. But because I've lurked around and I've hung out with you and the other ones, we're not in the same place as Ed would say, physical place. But I do feel that even though the physical difference is real, the way that we've been communicating with this technology has helped me appreciate the differences of talking to everybody. Does that make sense?
Right.
So it's kind of learning how to use the type. To me, it's really about how to use even our own bodies. I start with my body. I think we have a lot of misunderstandings of how to relate to our own bodies. And with that kind of extends out of how do I use this technology better? So I don't want to come across as a Luddite or against technology. It's all about, to me, is technology is human beings have an imagination or yearning to always to create things and to help them interact with their environment. But I think there's an old habit that we have is we get ahead of ourselves and we think we know we think we have control of the technology, and that's what I want to call into question. Is this notion, we're in control of the technology. I question that sometimes.
So what do you mean by that exactly?
What I mean by that is that we've gotten so enthused about creating algorithms or this or that that other forces are using it for not good reasons, you know, just like our own human body media. If I'm not aware of how of my body, I can use my very body to kill somebody, to harm somebody. So the same principle I carry out in terms of any technology we create externally for ourselves is, do we really understand the use, how we're using it, and are we, there's a sort of moral component that I think that is that he puts in, speaking into there, the moral component of appreciating there's a self and there's an other. And if we don't acknowledge that and appreciate that difference, that in a very concrete way, we have a tendency, human beings have a tendency to be afraid of the other because they're different, and try to control and manipulate them and turn them into ourselves. I think that's a moral code that we have to be aware of.
And this will maybe go into the first chapter a bit, but he goes into Plato and Socrates, focusing on kind of the dialogic communication, and then the Jesus's parables, or his way of communicating, is more of a dissemination, is what they call it. And like in the parable of the sower, the seeds are scattered, and so it's about sender and receiver. And you're saying that with technology and with certain aspects of the modern day concept of communication, we want to take control. We want to send, and we want to control the receiving.
Yes, that's important. We want to control the receiving, because the person on the other side receiving is different, and we want to make sure that they get the message our way, and we don't respect. No, they're different. We need to allow them to receive it the way they receive it, and then work with the playback.
Right. And for those that have deaf ears, or who have stony ground and not enough soil to let those scattered seeds grow, then you say, okay, well, that's their way of going about it, but we'll focus on those who are able to hear us rather than force. Or
I agree. I think you make a good point. You bring up a good point. I think part of this now, this is outside the book a little bit, but from what I feel is, how well can we listen non-defensively? See, now I'm going to add in a component of those that don't listen to us. Are we being aware of how defensive we are because they're not doing what we want them to do? I think part of the notion of communication that he even kind of acknowledges is a lot of communication has been focused on one side of just sending out. Okay. And when you're only focused on speaking, and if I can only get the right words to talk to you, I can convince you that I know better than you do. That feels to me like, no, you don't. Fuck you. No, you can't. If you're going to come across to me like you're just trying, like a pitch, you're trying to sell me a car that I may not want, I can feel that. That right from the get-go, that means that person isn't listening to what I have to say or what my needs are based on our exchange. Right.
And that reminds me of how, like, if we focus on this technology, or even face-to-face, person to person, pedestrian to pedestrian, we start out with, what will this person receive? It's been said that you can gain a lot of knowledge from talking about the weather with another person, or saying, so how's the weather today? And their response, it it can determine whether they're in a pissy mood or whether they're wanting to
Exactly.
interact with you. And so you can say, okay, I'm leaving that and I'm moving on to either focus on myself or another. So that's what he focuses on. In the first paragraph, which I don't have the book in front of me right now, but he's essentially focusing on that failed communication and how even that is a modern notion.
Yeah.
So he even mentions communication with animals, with machines, and that's more, at least what I gathered from the Marvelous Clouds. He's really attempting to take us out of that mental mode, which is maybe the current if we use Gebser's structures, there's the mental focus, the mental structure, but Peters wants to take us back in his books to times before this intellectual.
Well, and I would say, Doug, that actually, yeah, he's trying to take us out of the mental in the sense of we're kind of trapped in it. And he's trying to, okay, I don't think necessarily we have to leave it behind, but we can see where we're stuck here. And so he's trying to poke holes in it and take us back to Plato, where the original Plato in different places, they had a love of trying to, a yearning to communicate with each other and find the best way to, I mean, they had good intentions they practiced rhetoric, you know. There was a certain formality of trying to exchange arguments and hearing arguments back and forth. And that's the very original going back of trying to form a way of communicating. So he takes us back there, but how I think what's changed from back then, and I may be putting something in here that's not necessarily true, but I think it has merit, with the age of mercantile and capitalism. He makes a point that communication has become hijacked from using it to sell something and get people to buy something. And that has become the more of how we view communication is, what can I get from you, rather than what can we just share, like we're doing now. Right. I have no need to get anything from you. You know, I don't want to. I want to share why we're putting this cafe on, or why we think this topic is. I mean, that's an element. I do have a sort of agenda of my passion for it, but basically either people are going to come and listen and exchange ideas, or they're not. Big deal. I'm not making, I don't want to make any money off of it in a sense.
Right. Well, great. I really don't have too much else to add. I will take note that when browsing on the site, I did notice we already had 2 or 3 discussions on communication. And that each conversation will focus on a different kind of core aspect. I think one Mark put on, which was more about social communication and how that's transitioning into kind of the global, or at least that's where the conversation went, was kind of how do we get global communication?
Right.
But there's all sorts of different meanings of communication.
Right.
So I hope we can convey either in this conversation or on the page we've created for the cafe, kind of the direction we'd like to go. So that direction doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the way it goes. So is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
Well, I think to be transparent, my passion or my agenda here is to know that just because we're different, that we learn that differences we don't have to be afraid of the different ways people communicate, but we do have to learn skillfully of how to interact with different styles of communication. I have a vast array of friends that are conservative, libertarian, and different, because I've taken to heart that part of the problem in America today is that we've kind of siloed ourselves away from, because somebody has we know they have a certain agenda or they have a certain style of communication. We don't want to talk to them. And that's an individual decision of when and where you engage certain styles of people that communicate. But I've made a point that within my comfort zone, and I trust my comfort zone, I will try to dialogue with somebody that I totally disagree with, just because I think it challenges me to listen non-defensively and maybe not agree with their point, but I can hear, to be open to hearing, well, they got to where they are. There's a backstory of why they got to that position. And maybe that will just help me understand where they're coming from.
Right. And that's one of the reasons I keep coming back to this site is, well, the face-to-face that I have here in my small town.
Yeah.
There are quite a few opposing views. It's a highly conservative area. So it's hard to find like-minded individuals, but at the same time, to get deep into conversation with this other side, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's pretty difficult to do just in passing, or even with neighbors and things like that. So,
and I would agree 100%. And that's why asking about the weather is a good question. People think that's a way for us to take a kind of a atmospheric read, because one of the ways I've been able to engage people that think differently is that I take that read. And one of the things I don't do is I don't initially try to promote my point of view until I know we've established somewhat of a rapport that we, on just minimum level of having a difference of, they like coffee, black coffee. No, I like mocha. Kind of start with the minimum differences before you jump to the big ones.
Right.
So, it's kind of it's yours and my secret agent, undercover agent way of interacting.
Exactly.
So I just think, everybody has to pace themselves in doing this. What I am trying to really counter is the way that how people are just they group themselves into like-minded people. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but that can be dangerous in itself if you group yourself strictly into like-minded people. That's sociologically, they say that's one of the ways that extremism comes on board. That within a group of like-minded people, if one person starts, thinking for themselves and kind of disagreeing within the group, guess what? That group will shame them and shun them. So it's not just group against group. It's what can happen within a group of like-minded people if there's a dissenting point of view, a different point of view within one group. So I think this is about understanding that dynamic that is about how groups interact with each other and how individuals within groups can have a similar problem, even within a group of like-minded people. But I find it exciting. That's another thing is because I learned to listen non-defensively. I've been able to develop a sort of resilience and an ear of not, at least immediately, knee-jerk hearing somebody's point of view as a threat to my point of view. I kind of get excited. Oh, really? You think that way? Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. I may, in my head, I may be disagreeing with them, but I'm trying. This is part of what we posted on the site too, is bringing empathetic experience to difference. The hardest practice the hardest way to practice empathy is when somebody is critiquing you, like I've stated on the site. When my daughter started becoming a woman and started pushing back against my views, and that I had to take ownership that I want her to speak up for herself, but it hurt going, why are you attacking, you know, the raw level, daughter, you're not supposed to be attacking me. You're not supposed to be, you know, no, I had to maintain empathy, even though I may disagree with some aspect of her point of view. Let's put it that way.
Right. And I guess I'll experience that once I have older children.
Yeah. But I think that's the test of the level of how we can use empathy and critical thinking together. Because I think, from my point of view, it's learning how to bring those two in unison. And that's just something that I know that it's an ongoing process. How to work with those two sides of our faculties, our capacities. And that's all.
Thanks, Mike. That was,
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time, Doug, and doing this. And I think this is a good way, actually, this is an interesting way to promote maybe some cafes, is having an interview so that people can check in with this aspect and see how far they want to go with it.
Yeah, well, that's good feedback. I appreciate that.
Okay, so I hope you're having a good day. Is it snowing?
No, it's 60 degrees here today, but it's pretty gloomy, dark.
Oh,
the clouds
okay.
aren't so marvelous. They're pretty nasty right now. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, the rain's going to turn to snow over the weekend, I guess tonight. So.
Well, again, I thank you for taking the time, Doug.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else?
That's all.
That's all, folks. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.